Let me be direct with you from the outset, because what has just been completed in Syria is something that Israeli military planners have been working to prevent for the better part of 15 years, and something that changes the operational calculus of every air operation over the Eastern Mediterranean in ways that are concrete, measurable, and immediate. This is not a theoretical development. This is not a diplomatic announcement. This is a technical completion of an integrated air defense architecture that now covers Syrian airspace with a capability that did not exist last month. Everyone is focused on whether the Syrian political transition is going to stabilize, whether the new government in Damascus can control its territory, whether reconstruction will begin, whether refugees will return. These are important questions. But while that political conversation is consuming diplomatic bandwidth, a parallel military integration has been finalized that the political conversation is almost entirely ignoring. The Syrian air defense network, which was shattered by years of Israeli strikes, by the deliberate and systematic degradation campaign that Israel called Operation Chess, has been rebuilt. It has been rebuilt with Iranian technical assistance. It has been integrated with Iranian command and control systems. And the S-300 batteries that were supplied to Syria, delivered, then disabled by Israeli cyber operations, then partially restored, have now been connected to a broader integrated network that extends their effective coverage geometry in ways that a standalone battery cannot achieve. In the next 18 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly what this integrated network consists of, why the integration with Iranian systems is the critical factor that changes everything, what it means operationally for Israeli Air Force freedom of action over Syria, and what the broader implications are for the trajectory of the regional military balance. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what we are about to cover is being analyzed in defense ministries from Tel Aviv to Ankara to Moscow, and you are not getting this level of technical context from mainstream sources. To understand why the integration of Syrian and Iranian air defense matters more than the individual systems themselves, you need to understand a basic principle of modern air defense architecture. A single radar system, no matter how sophisticated, has geometric limitations. It sees at certain frequencies, in certain directions, to certain ranges. It can be deceived by flying at specific altitudes, by using terrain masking, by approaching from specific azimuth angles that fall in gaps between radar coverage cones. Modern air forces have spent enormous resources mapping those gaps and developing penetration routes that exploit them. The Israeli Air Force has been extraordinarily successful at this over the years, largely because it had precise intelligence on Syrian radar capabilities and the experience to develop penetration corridors through the gaps. Integration changes this when multiple radar systems operating at different frequencies, positioned at different geographic locations, and sharing data through a common command and control backbone are fused into a single recognized air picture. The gaps shrink dramatically. An aircraft that is below the detection threshold of one radar may be visible to another. A jamming technique effective against one frequency band is ineffective against a different frequency. The fusion of diverse sensors into a common air picture is not additive. It is multiplicative in its effect on the defender's situational awareness. This is precisely what has just been completed between Syrian and Iranian air defense systems. And the Iranian contribution is not simply additional hardware. It is the command, control, and communications backbone that allows the disparate Syrian radar and missile systems to function as an integrated network rather than as isolated batteries. Announcement number one, the specific capabilities of the integrated network and why the numbers tell a story that the qualitative assessments miss. The Syrian air defense network, before the current integration, consisted of a patchwork of surviving Soviet-era systems. Buk M2E batteries, Pantsir short-range point defense systems, Tor M1 systems for medium altitude coverage, and the S-300 PMU-2 systems that were delivered by Russia, but that had a troubled operational history, including the Israeli-linked electronic disruption of their command systems. According to the International Institute for Strategic Studies Military Balance publication and cross-reference with satellite imagery analysis published by open-source intelligence analysts at groups including Aurora Intel and the Middle East Images Project, Syria's operational air defense density as of 2 years ago was approximately 30 to 40% of what it had been before 2011. The current integration adds 3 specific Iranian contributions. The first is the Bavar 373 long-range surface-to-air missile system, which Iran developed as an indigenous alternative after the original Russian S-300 delivery was blocked by sanctions. The Bavar 373 has a claimed maximum engagement range of 200 kilometers and a maximum engagement altitude of 27 kilometers, according to specifications published by the Iranian Ministry of Defense and assessed as broadly credible by Western technical analysts who have reviewed the system's components. Positioned in western Syria, a Bavar 373 battery extends radar detection coverage well into Lebanese airspace, the eastern Mediterranean, and the northern approaches to Israel. The second Iranian contribution is the Arash electronic warfare system, a signals intelligence and jamming platform that Iran has deployed alongside air defense batteries in both Yemen and Lebanon. Its function is not to shoot down aircraft. Its function is to degrade the effectiveness of the airborne electronic warfare systems that modern aircraft use to suppress radar coverage before a strike mission. The Arash is the countermeasure to the countermeasure. The third Iranian contribution is the most significant and the least discussed. The secure fiber optic communications backbone linking Syrian radar sites to a common data fusion center that, according to analysis from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and Iranian military technical sources, is connected to Iranian ground-based and space-based sensor networks. This is the integration element that converts individual batteries from isolated point defense assets into nodes in a networked kill chain. According to analysis by retired United States Air Force General David Deptula, who has written extensively on integrated air defense challenges, the difference between a networked air defense system and a collection of individual batteries is the difference between a fence and a wall. Individual batteries can be penetrated through gaps. A properly networked system closes those gaps with redundant sensor coverage and can cue missile batteries to targets they cannot independently detect. Received. That is announcement number 1. Announcement number 2, what this means specifically for the Israeli Air Force and why the public Israeli statements are not matching the private assessments. Israel has been conducting strikes inside Syria for years. The stated purpose has varied, degrading Hezbollah weapons transfers, targeting Iranian-linked military infrastructure, striking ballistic missile storage facilities, eliminating specific commanders or weapons scientists. The strikes have generally been successful in achieving their immediate kinetic objectives. The aircraft returned safely. The targets were destroyed or damaged. The Syrian and Iranian air defense systems shot missiles that mostly missed. That pattern of success was built on a foundation of Israeli intelligence about Syrian radar gaps, Israeli electronic warfare capabilities to suppress Syrian radar tracking, and the absence of a networked Syrian air defense system that could fuse data across platforms and provide targeting quality tracks to multiple batteries simultaneously. Each of those 3 foundations is now less solid than it was. The Israeli intelligence advantage on Syrian radar gaps diminishes when the gaps are closed by new sensors. The Israeli electronic warfare effectiveness against Syrian radars is reduced when Iranian electronic warfare systems are added to the defensive equation. And the absence of a networked Syrian system is precisely what the current integration is intended to address. According to defense technology analysts at Breaking Defense and The War Zone, both publications with substantial sourcing in American defense procurement and operations communities, Israeli defense planners have been studying the Iranian integration project in Syria for 18 months. The conclusion of that study, according to sourced reporting, is that the Syrian air air defense environment is now, and I want to be precise about this word, contested. Not impenetrable, not hermetically sealed. Contested, meaning that Israeli aircraft can still operate over Syria, but the cost and complexity of doing so has increased, and the probability of aircraft loss on any given mission has risen to a level that changes the risk-benefit calculation for certain categories of strikes. That is not a small development. It is a fundamental change. An air force that can strike with near impunity can do so frequently, with small packages of aircraft with short planning timelines against a wide range of targets. An air force operating in a contested environment must use larger strike packages, more complex planning, more sophisticated electronic warfare support, and must accept higher risk, which means it strikes less frequently, against higher priority targets only, and with more deliberate preparation. The Israeli Air Force is transitioning from the first category to the second in the Syrian operational environment. Stay with me, because this is where the narrative completely changes and where the implications extend far beyond Syria itself. Announcement number 3, and this is the connection that virtually no mainstream outlet has made. The integration of Syrian and Iranian air defense systems is not a Syrian development. It is a demonstration project. It is Iran showing every potential partner in the region what an Iranian integrated air defense network looks like in practice, and signaling to potential adversaries what the future cost of air operations over any Iranian-aligned territory will be. Hezbollah in Lebanon is watching this. If the Syrian integration works as designed, the argument for a parallel integration of Lebanese air defense assets, which currently exist only in rudimentary form, becomes significantly stronger. Yemen is watching this. The Houthi air defense capability, while primitive by comparison, has already demonstrated that even unsophisticated systems can impose costs on advanced air forces, as Saudi Arabia's air campaign in Yemen demonstrated at considerable expense to the Saudi Air Force. Iraq is watching this. Iraqi militia groups with Iranian connections have been acquiring short and medium-range air defense systems. The Syrian integration provides a potential template for how those systems could be networked into something more formidable than their individual components suggest. Iran is not simply building an air defense network in Syria. It is publishing a capability demonstration to every potential partner in the region. And it is demonstrating that the capability is available, that the technical assistance can be provided, and that the integration architecture works. Received. That is announcement number 3. Now, let me tell you what the Western and Israeli narrative is missing, because the framing of this development in the press that is covering it at all is significantly underweighting what has actually changed. The Israeli government's public position is that it retains freedom of action over Syria and will continue to strike targets it considers threatening to Israeli security. This position is probably true in a narrow technical sense. The Israeli aircraft can still fly. The Israeli strikes can still occur. The Syrian air defense network, however improved, is not invulnerable. But the Israeli public framing obscures the central question, which is not whether Israel can still strike Syria, but whether the cost-benefit calculus of those strikes has fundamentally changed. And on that specific question, the evidence points toward yes. Think carefully about what this represents. For 15 years, the Israeli policy of maintaining a strategic buffer against Iranian military entrenchment in Syria was premised on Israeli air superiority over Syrian airspace. So that air superiority was the practical mechanism through which Israeli policy was implemented. It was the tool that gave Israeli policy its operational credibility. Now that tool is more expensive to use, more risky to employ, and more limited in its availability. A policy that depends on a tool that is becoming increasingly costly to use is a policy that is gradually losing its implementation mechanism. That is not an argument that Israeli policy has already failed. It is an argument that the window in which Israeli military strikes can reliably enforce Israeli strategic preferences in Syria is narrowing. And it is narrowing at precisely the moment when Iranian entrenchment in Syria has reached a depth that will be very difficult to reverse through any means short of a comprehensive military campaign that would trigger consequences extending far beyond Syria. The historical parallel here is the slow erosion of Athenian naval supremacy in the final decade of the Peloponnesian War. Athens retained a formidable navy throughout the conflict. It could still operate, still win individual engagements. But the combination of Persian financial support for Spartan naval development, the loss of Athenian allied cities, and the attrition of Athenian manpower gradually converted Athenian naval superiority from a decisive strategic asset into an increasingly costly instrument that could no longer achieve decisive results. The Athenian fleet did not disappear overnight. It was gradually outcompeted into strategic irrelevance. Israeli air power over Syria is not at that point. But the trajectory described by the current integration is the beginning of that trajectory. So where does this leave us? 3 paths forward. Path 1, Israel, assessing the new Syrian air defense environment as a genuine escalation of strategic threat, launches a preemptive, comprehensive strike campaign against Iranian-linked air defense infrastructure in Syria before the integration is fully operational. This would be the most aggressive response, the one that matches the rhetoric of Israeli officials who have consistently said they will not allow Iranian military entrenchment in Syria. The operational window for such a campaign may be narrowing, which is precisely the argument that Israeli hawks are making internally. The risk is Iranian retaliation at a scale and across a range of targets that the limited Israeli-Iranian exchanges of the past several years would not predict. Path 2, Israel adapts its operational approach, investing in more sophisticated penetration capabilities, more advanced electronic warfare systems, longer-range standoff weapons that can strike Syrian targets without entering Syrian airspace at all, and potentially seeking American assistance in developing capabilities specifically tailored to defeating the Iranian integrated network. This is the gradual adaptation path. It is costly, it takes time, and it accepts the interim reality that Israeli freedom of action in Syrian airspace is contested rather than unchallenged. Path 3, the changed air defense environment functions as a deterrent that reduces the frequency of Israeli strikes to a level that allows Iranian military infrastructure in Syria to consolidate, expand, and mature in ways that will be far more difficult to address in 5 years than they are today. This is the Iranian strategic preference. They are not expecting to defeat the Israeli Air Force. They are expecting to raise the cost of Israeli operations enough that political and military risk calculations in Tel Aviv produce a de facto acceptance of Iranian military presence in Syria. I think path 2 is the Israeli path for the next 12 months, with path 1 becoming more likely if specific intelligence emerges about weapon systems in Syria that Israeli planners assess as crossing a defined red line. Path 3 is the outcome if Path 2 proves inadequate to the timeline of Iranian consolidation. Here are the questions I want you to take away. If the Syrian-Iranian air defense integration proves effective enough to impose significant costs on Israeli air operations, how long before Israeli military doctrine begins to shift in ways that acknowledge the loss of air superiority as an unconditional assumption? If this integration is a demonstration project and Hezbollah in Lebanon achieves a similar networked air defense capability, what does that do to the entire strategic architecture of the Northern Front that Israel has been managing for decades? And if Iran has successfully changed the air defense environment in Syria without triggering a comprehensive Israeli military response, what does that tell every other regional actor about the thresholds of Israeli military action? Tell me in the comments what you think the most significant implication of this integration is for Israeli military doctrine. Tell me whether you believe Israel will launch a comprehensive strike to reverse the integration before it is fully operational, or whether the political and military risk calculations will prevent that decision. We will keep tracking every development in the Syrian air defense situation, the Israeli response, and the broader Iranian military posture across the Levant. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone in your network who is trying to understand how the military balance of the Middle East is shifting in real time. Turn on notifications, and we will see you in the next one. Let me close with an observation about what the Syrian air defense integration tells us about the broader evolution of the Iranian regional strategy, because I think this is the dimension that most Western analysis is consistently underweighting. Iran's approach to regional security competition has been evolving in a consistent direction for 20 years, and that direction is toward what military strategists call anti-access area denial, but applied at the regional rather than the narrow geographic scale. The original Iranian IRGC strategy was based on proxy forces, on Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, various militias in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen. These proxy forces were the mechanism through which Iran projected power without projecting Iranian regular military forces in ways that would trigger direct superpower response. The second layer of that strategy, which developed alongside the proxy force layer, was the ballistic missile and drone arsenal, which created the ability to strike targets from Iranian territory without requiring Iranian aircraft to penetrate contested airspace. The missile strikes on Saudi Aramco facilities in 2019, the drone and missile strikes on American bases in Iraq in 2020, the direct strikes on Israeli territory in April 2024. These were demonstrations of the second layer operating at strategic scale. What the Syrian air defense integration represents is a third layer, specifically the creation of networked defensive architecture in allied and partner territory that extends the Iranian protective umbrella and raises the cost of air operations against Iranian-aligned forces well beyond Iranian borders. This third layer is qualitatively different from the first two. The proxy force layer uses human intermediaries who make their own decisions and have their own interests. The missile layer operates from Iranian territory and requires Iranian decision-making for activation. The integrated air defense network in Syria operates independently once established, protecting Iranian-linked assets and personnel without requiring specific Iranian military decisions in real time. This three-layer architecture, proxy forces, strategic strike capability, and extended air defense integration represents a sophisticated design for regional power projection that does not rely on a large, expensive, conventional military force that Iran could not sustain economically. It is asymmetric strategy applied with genuine sophistication, and it has been built incrementally over 2 decades with sufficient patience that each individual step seemed manageable, while the cumulative effect was producing something far more consequential than any single step suggested. Western strategic analysis has consistently evaluated each Iranian capability development in isolation, treating the Hezbollah proxy as a separate problem from the ballistic missile program, treating the missile program as a separate problem from the drone development, treating the drone development as a separate problem from the satellite program, and now apparently treating the Syrian air defense integration as a separate problem from all of the above. This siloed analysis consistently underestimates the cumulative strategic effect because it cannot account for the interaction between the layers. The satellite constellation makes the missile program more accurate. The Syrian air defense integration protects the Hezbollah infrastructure that the satellite constellation monitors. The proxy forces create the tactical situations that the missiles and drones can exploit. These are not separate programs. They are layers of a single architecture. Understanding them as a single architecture rather than as separate problems is the analytical prerequisite for developing a strategy that addresses them effectively. Whether Western governments and their intelligence communities are capable of making that analytical shift is a question I genuinely cannot answer with confidence. But it is the question on which the trajectory of the next decade in the Middle East will partly depend. Tell me in the comments what you think the most significant implication of this integrated architecture is for the long-term regional balance. We will keep tracking every development. Subscribe now, and we will see you in the next one.